Okay, I think we will make a start. So welcome everybody. It's great to have so many of you here. So basically, if Anne-Mette, could you just turn the slide, please? Yes. Just for a very quick outline of this morning's session. So first, I'm just going to say a few words as part of an introduction. Then my colleague Anne-Mette will talk about more kind of the legal aspects of the workshop today, with the GDPR and so on. And then I will kind of continue kind of focusing more on ethical issues, more like also in terms of data preparation, kind of at a later stage. So Anne-Mette will focus more on kind of data collection and legal implications, and I will focus more on data preparation and ethical considerations. If you could. So this project is funded as part of the SERISS project. So just a few words about SERISS. This is a 4-year Horizon 2020 cluster project that brings together European research infrastructures that deal with large-scale cross-national surveys. So for example, the ESS, so the European Social Survey, or SHARE, which is a study on health and retirement and aging. But also, it brings together kind of larger organizations like CESTA. CESTA is a consortium of European archives. So both of us belong kind of, or are affiliated to CESTA because we both work for European archives. I'm going to say a few more words about ourselves just very shortly. But what I also wanted to say that the goal of SERISS is really to improve methodologies and large-scale methodologies and tools for large-scale surveys, which is why this course is taking place as part of this kind of large conference, the ESRA conference. But this topic is, of course, also of interest to other researchers working with other methodologies, whether quanti, quali. I mean, everybody is concerned by the GDPR, by ethical issues, and that's why we kind of opened it up to other researchers. So many of you are not actually working with large-scale surveys, but that's perfectly fine. And what I also want to say, well, which you saw my email saying, well, we are from the perspective of the social sciences, which is true. So, of course, I mean, the way we will be presenting is influenced, of course, by our background, but the topic applies really to kind of any discipline, as long as we deal with human subjects and get to collect data, whether quanti or quali. And so we feel that it kind of relates, and of course, feel free to ask questions. And we will do our best to answer. So maybe you have kind of aspects that are more specific to your background or to your field. But the idea is also that we will make that kind of workshop as interactive as possible. That means that since you are a large audience and you come from very different backgrounds, we will not kind of do exercise or so, because the idea is that, well, probably many of you would not relate, but we will really kind of encourage discussion, questions, and we felt this would maybe be the best way to handle the topic. So maybe the next slide now. So just to say where we come from, so my colleague Anne-Mette comes from Norway. She works for the Norwegian Center for Research Data, and she's especially kind of providing advice in relation with legal aspects, GDPR and so on. That's right. Okay. And myself, I come from Switzerland. I work for the Swiss Center of Expertise in the Social Sciences. And I'm more like in charge of data promotion and data management. So I'm very interested in everything that is around data management, as you will also see later when I will say more about this. So maybe just a few words about also just to kind of give a bit of a general overview about why this workshop. So basically the relevance of the topic. So over the last years, we have seen a kind of strengthening of ethical and legal frameworks for data protection. So we see this at the European level with the GDPR, which has reinforced the rights of people, the individuals whose personal data are processed. So people have more and more rights. And on the other hand, in parallel, we have increased pressure to share data. So funders, journals, they kind of really want to have access to data, especially data that underlies publications. So this leads to all kinds of tensions. On the one hand, we have to protect respondents. On the other hand, we have to share the data. And this becomes the more so tricky when we work with personal data and especially also sensitive data. And that's why, I mean, this kind of general like environment, I mean, it also kind of brings new challenges to researchers how to deal with all this. And this is what we are going today to go a bit more deeper in the topic and hopefully to bring some new ideas or highlight some important aspects to take into account when you are doing research. So, and here very quickly, just wanted also to highlight the difference between legal and ethical. So research is governed by a number of rules that can be more or less restrictive. So for example, there are laws, there are charters, codes, good practices, but also personal convictions. And that's why it's useful to distinguish between what are legal and what are those rules that are more ethical. So legal first, so the law consists of a set of rules put in place by the ruling authority. So this means, I mean, there are also sanctions behind it. They are subject to sanctions. And they are binding. It means that we must follow them if we don't want to have a sanction. So for example, the GDPR is just one example. And on the other hand, we have ethics, which are more morally based principles of conduct that define what is right or wrong beyond strictly legal obligations. So in that sense, it's not like binding like our kind of the legal rules. I mean, we are not going necessarily to get sanctions, but they are extremely important principles. So the distinction is important as an action may be legal but not ethical, or may be ethical but not legal. So here just a short example. I worked on a project that kind of involved doing research in Palestine, and we had a lot of people who gave testimonies, and they really wanted their name to appear. So they wanted to be cited, they wanted their full name, and so they gave consent somehow to use their name. They wanted even their name to be used, but this we could not accept because it was extremely sensitive data, and they were kind of in a very kind of in a political context that, I mean, what they were saying, they could put their own lives at risk. So sometimes, you know, like even if people want something, the researcher the respondent wants something, you cannot accept this. Because you have to follow this kind of ethical principles. So that is just a little illustration. So I will now hand over to Anne-Mette, and who is going to speak about the privacy legislation and consequences for research. Oh yes, and just like we are just filming it, but it's just for ourselves, and you are not appearing on it, so no worry.
So, okay, hello everyone. Nice to see you all. How many of you come from this university? Can you raise a hand just to see? From Zagreb? Can you just want to see? Yeah, I know we have a lot of participants from locally, and that's nice. Nice to see you all. This is my first time in Croatia, so I really like your country and your food and your people and everything, so this is nice. Okay, I will talk about privacy legislation and of course the GDPR. And Alexandra and I, we are not a part of the EU. Norway is a part of the European Economic Area. That means that we also, I will talk more about that later. But we were talking before that it was a bit unusual for us to speak about the GDPR. We are not a part of the EU formally, but you are, or not. Someone from outside EU here? Other people from outside EU? I know, no, everyone is from countries within EU, okay? Yeah. So, this is the topics for the first part, and after this first part, we will have a short break. Okay? We will also be you will also be able to ask me questions, and you will not be recorded, but I will repeat your questions if you are asking me something just for the recording. Okay? Okay. The GDPR was implemented in last year, so we have some experiences on how to apply the law, but we don't have many. So what I'm saying today is based on the few experiences that we have already, okay? And of course, it's from my perspective as from Norway's perspective mostly, but I also have some examples from other countries. If you have experiences to share with us, that's very nice. So the GDPR will apply to the data controller or a data protector. I will also tell you what the differences between them are later. And if you are a data controller or a data processor outside the EU, the GDPR will also apply. Okay? So if you are from the US and you are doing research in the EU, you need also to apply to the GDPR. And if you are collaborating, of course, with researchers outside the EU, you need to apply to the GDPR. And if you are collecting data outside the EU, the GDPR will also apply, right? So if you're going to another continent, the GDPR will apply. Okay. So, what about personal data? What is personal data? From my country, we sometimes talk about personal data as data that is something about your private life. If it's about you as a professional, it's not personal data. And I'm not sure if that's the case in other countries, but personal data is every kind of information that can be traced back to you as persons, right? So it could be names and background information. The information that you leave online is also personal information, and the GDPR will apply. It's your voice, and it's the video. And it can also be administrative data. If you have like registries in your countries and you can use that for research, it's also personal data because it can be connected to an ID, for example. So these are the most common kind of personal data that you can use in this kind of research. And of course, it could be written on a paper, it can be processed on your computer, it could be pictures. So, and it applies when it's surveys, if it's electronic service, it could be physical, like paper service, and it could be like recordings, of course. So it's many different ways you can collect this kind of personal data that will be traceable to a person. Okay, and a lot of researchers, they don't really, they're like, when I'm teaching, they are just like, oh my God, I have personal data. What am I going to do? What is going to happen to me? I didn't know that was personal data because we have done this for many years, and now someone tell me this is personal data and the GDPR will apply and I will get a large fine or something. But of course not. It's not like someone will come and give you a fine right away. It's your institution that has to give you your tools so that you can, keep up, with the laws and the ethics, of course, like Alexandra talked about. So we have this other concept, and that is the concept of special categories of personal data. Have you heard about this before? Before the GDPR? No? We also, in some countries like us, we call it sensitive data because it's more sensitive in a way, like it's more personal. If you talk about religion, if you talk about politics, it's more sensitive or more personal. Okay, so it means that we have to find ways to protect this data more than we protect your name or your where you live or your occupation. That is not so sensitive, but when you're talking about your political beliefs, it could be more sensitive, okay? So this is the list. The list is not full, but this is the list that will be for your kind of research. So now I talked about the personal data and special categories. I want to talk about the legal basis, because when you are processing personal data or personal data that are special categories, you need a legal basis, right? So the legal basis, you have to state which legal basis your processing will apply to, right? So the legal basis for research, the most common is consent. I will talk more about the consent later. And the other one is public interest. And our experience is that it's a difference between countries that will use consent as their main or most common legal basis for research. Like my country will use consent as the legal basis. And now I'm talking about consent as legal basis. I'm not talking about the ethical consent. So that's a different. When we talk about consent in, you know, the research ethics kind of way, that's more or less the same, but not quite the same. Okay. So in countries that are not use the legal basis consent, they use public interest. And I think you will have to find out and check with your own practice, with your own national legislation, which is more used in your countries. And of course, I think that maybe it could be differences inside the countries also. It could be, or researchers, and between fields, there could be differences in which legal basis they will state. And of course, when it comes to collaboration, this could be difficult. You have to think about that, okay? So, but I think we all agree that consent in one and another way, the ethical way, or the legal consent is necessary anyway when you are collecting data from people that you are contacting in some way, right? So if you are contacting people, you will ask for consent. Do you want to participate in my research? And then you will get a consent. So it could be an ethical consent or the legal consent. I will talk about that. So for the special categories of data that will be more sensitive, you will need this explicit consent. And this means that you have to give information in a certain way that will make sure that your participant has consented for you to collect and to keep their sensitive data. And in the way we can do this is to use kind of templates that will, that you can tick boxes that will show that people have consented explicitly for you to use this kind of data. So I will always advise you to use template if you can find one that will suit you. Okay. Yeah? Now we are talking about, yes? Yes, I will try to, the question is, if you need a signature when you have this explicit consent, yes, you will need a signature for the consent to be legal, So the consent has to be documented. I was going to talk about it. You need to document the consent with a signature. So it can be a written signature. You can also have the consent, like you can tick online boxes and you can identify you online. Or you can also have the consent recorded in some or another way. That's the ways we can document consent. But the law of the GDPR will not state exactly how to document it, but this is how we do it now, right? Was that okay? Yeah, the signature you will need, if you are going to use consent or explicit consent as the legal basis, you will need a signature, okay? Or, of course, it's possible to identify yourself electronically also in some countries if you have, the technology. You can also have kind of online identifier that will also be, your signature. Okay. In my country, we have it for some for some studies. So, a little bit about informed consent. I guess, have you all read about this or heard about this before? Yes. So this is known, right? So, I want to say something. This is also, I think, this is where the law is kind of hand in hand with the ethics. Yes, I think we agree on this because the consent must be freely given. It will also imply something ethical here, and you have to give a clear information. And just from my perspective, I've been working with a lot of researchers before and after GDPR. And they say to me, okay, you tell me that I have to give all this information to my informants in writing. And they will not understand what we are talking about, right? But at the same time, the GDPR states that you need to give all this information. You have to inform them about what you are going to do, about their rights, and where to contact someone. And it's difficult to do this in a way that is understandable, because you are using your academic language most of the time, but you are not always including academics in your studies. So this could be difficult, but you are allowed to rewrite. You know, if you have a template that your institution will provide you with, we have templates. You can rewrite it and do it more, understandably. So, okay. Yeah, and I'm not sure. Do you have experience with opt-in kind of consents, where you opt in, you get information and then you can opt in to participate, but you don't give your signature? Is that normal? Yes. Yeah. That's a kind of consent, but it's not a legal consent, right? So that will be a way to get an ethical kind of consent, when you just give your information orally or in writing, but you are not able to document the consent. Then it's not a legal consent. It's not a legal basis. It's not consent. Okay. So, and there's another point here I think is important to talk about, is it should be easy to withdraw from studies. Do you have experience with participants wanting to withdraw from studies? Any of you? Yes. Withdraw? Yeah. Do you have experience that the participant contact you to withdraw from your study? Or so? Yes. I think we have, in Norway, we have experienced that researchers tell us that more people will contact them to withdraw or to ask about the study after the GDPR than before the GDPR. So it's a kind of a change, that people are aware of their rights and their possibility to withdraw, and they will contact you. And of course, then you have to think about, how will I handle this? Okay. Will this be something I need to set off time to do? Because it will take some of your working hours to answer people that will contact you again. Okay? Think about that. So, and the last point I was talking about, the controller, you are the controller. You have to be able to demonstrate that consent is given. So, I just made this. I just have this with me now. It's someone else that made it before. It's just to demonstrate the timing timing and form of the consent. I will not talk about it right now, but this is something you can look at, and if it's useful for you, you can reflect on it. So under the GDPR, we need to document the consent. And I've been talking about this. So it could be a written document, or audio recording, or video recording. Do you have experience with documenting consent already? Yes? What is most normal? Do you have these written consents? Yes? How about keeping a lot of documents? If you yes? Yes. So, and of course, researchers told me that what do I do with all of these consent forms? I have hundreds of them, and where to keep them, how long to keep them, where to keep them, right? Well, I think it depends, but you need to keep them as long as you know the research is ongoing. So, and you need to keep them in a safe place. And of course, if your research is on a topic that is sensitive, it's important that that people will not be disclosed, right? So then you need to keep the information forms, the consent forms, separate from all the other data you have, right? So what about the data subject rights? Yes, question? When you are doing online research and then you have to ask yourself if your legal basis will be consent, because maybe you will not be in contact with people directly. So if you are doing kind of research on social media, maybe you will use another legal basis than consent, right? Of course, you can also have a consent on an email, I guess. We use that. That will also be documented, right? So if you are in contact with your people on an email, you can also get a consent on an email, right? And it will be documented.
Then I don't have the signature.
Well, it depends. In Norway, we will accept an email as a signature. We will accept it, but of course it can be national differences here, right? But I think in Norway we will accept an email in the same way that we will accept a written statement. So, hope that was good enough answer. Yes? Yeah? Yeah? Yeah. The question is, if I'm going to write articles after the project period is ended, will I need to keep the consent forms? Okay, so that will depend. Will you need to have personal data after the project period ends? We think about the project period as the time that you are processing personal data. So you have to think about the time frame of you keeping data not anonymous, right? So I will not talk very much about what anonymous data is today, because that is a big question and a big discussion. But think about the time frame you need to process the data that will contain personal information. So keep the time frame longer than not the time that you are collecting data, but also the time you need to finish your thesis or your articles. Okay? Yeah, another question, maybe. Yeah, I will repeat that for the recording. If you are doing an online survey, then you can also state in the survey that when you are completing the survey, you will state that you are consenting. But I'm not sure if it's possible to document that kind of consent. It will depend on if you are having an online identifier or not. So if you're not having this online identifier, you as a researcher will not be able to document that the individual has consented, you know what I mean. So then we will need to think about another legal basis than consent. But of course, ethically, you will have the consent. You know, so we will just think about consent as the legal basis is one thing, but also the ethical consent is another thing that is important. So when we're talking about legal basis that are not consent, you will also have the ethical consent. So think about this as two different kind of consents, right? Because it's not possible all the time to get consent, the legal consent, when collecting data. I don't think it's possible all the time, because when you're not in contact with people, it will be difficult to have their signature, right? So email, recording, and a paper written statement will be a consent. Yes? Over there first. Yeah, I will repeat again. So if you are conducting an online survey and you will get the response from the participant on an email, that will constitute a consent in a legal way if you keep the email, right? So just keep the email in one or another way, right? If you can have it filed somewhere, you will be able to demonstrate the consent. Okay? So that will be good, if that's possible. But if it's not possible, you can also state that public interest will be your legal basis. So you can also state that public interest is your legal basis. So legal basis and consent and ethical consent are two different we are thinking about two different things when we're thinking about legal basis and consent. Okay, I know this is difficult. So you don't need to know this today. Just remember you have heard it, and then it will be repeated, right? Okay. Okay. So she's talking about a journal, online journal, where people can register, and at the same time that they will consent for you to use the information about them. And then you will have this online identifier because they need to identify themselves, and they need to agree on terms, right? But you cannot. So I think that what you're saying is enough for you for the use you are going to have with the information, right? But if you're not stating that the information will be used for research, you will not have the consent for using it for research, right? Yeah. So if you're going to widen your use, you need to also state that you are going to use it for research. But this is a way to document and identify people. So when collecting data online, the problem is to identify the people, the person that the information belongs to, and to know that it's the correct person that. Yes, yes. I think you are fine. So I have this about a little bit about the rights of the data subjects. I will just say that the most important here is information, and the right to be forgotten, to be that they can withdraw from the project. Okay. So how to fulfill the right to information? I will just. So even if you are not using consent as the legal basis, let's say that you are using public interest as the legal basis, you still need to give information most of the time. You need to give them some information. So you can use a template. Okay, so I will give you some example. If you're going to collect data from social media, is it possible for you to give information to people on that platform that you are doing research? Okay, let's say that it's possible. You can give them information and you can state their rights. You can say that they can contact you if they want more information about the project. Of course, if you are going to do research on administrative data, you can also have information on your website, and that will also be useful if you are doing all kind of research. In Norway, we will advise them to have information on their websites on their ongoing projects. If they are large, of course, and if they are including a lot of people, we will say give information throughout the project, especially if you are doing research that will last for very long. It's important to give information again and again, so that you will always state what is going on in my project, right? But of course, if you have a newsletter, you can use that. If you have an email list, you can send newsletters to your informants and give them updates on your project. People will be happy to have updates. If they have signed up for it, some people will not have it. So you can ask, do you want to have updates on your project you are in? and then they will say yes or no. We advise to give individual information to people, but if not possible, you can of course give information online or through, and if the population is very large, you can also argue that it's impossible to give information to them. Yes. So he asked me about ethnographic research, and that is a very good example where you can claim that it's impossible to give information to every people that you are in contact with, right? But most of the time you will not collect data on all the people. You are doing research, but you are not collecting data on them, right? So you are only collecting data that are not identifiable most of the time, I guess. So when you are your main informants, you might need to get a consent from. But of course, the legal consent is difficult to fulfill in that kind of research, because people in other cultures, they will not know what this written document means. So you need to give the information in another way that will not meet the demands of the GDPR. And then you need also to state another legal basis, that is public interest, right? But you will have the consent, but the consent will be different from the consent we are talking about when we are talking about the GDPR. So, very good example. Yeah. Okay, so this is the list. I took it from our website, and this is the list that we provide to our users. So this is a list of content that you should or you need to have in an information letter. So, and that is why the example of ethnographic research is so important, because people in other cultures without the EU will not understand what this is about. So this is just a very long list about, you know, information that could be in this information template. And of course we have this information template. You are free to look at it. You can look at our website and see it, and you can give me some response and tell me, is this okay or not, if you have any. So this is very long, and sometimes it's necessary to give a lot of information. So I will also say a little bit about a data protection impact assessment. And after I'm finished here, we will have a short break, okay? So the Article 35 defines when the DPIA is required and what it should contain and who will implement it. And this is a new obligation with the GDPR. Did you hear about this already, or is this completely new for you? If this is new, raise a hand. Yeah. Thank you. So a lot of people didn't hear about this before. So the main purpose is to ensure the safeguard for the register, okay? And we do it. You need to do it. Or we, NSD, will do it on behalf of the researcher. We provide this as a service for our users. So we will make this kind of assessment on behalf of the researchers, and in collaboration with the researcher, we will have this kind of, we will do it together. And it's when it's high risk, and high risk is often related to collecting big amounts of data on many people and handling it over a very long time period. So it's time, and it's number of people, and it's number of variables, okay? And one more, do you know what that is? I have another variable here that will children, yes. If it's children involved in your research, and another thing, it's the kind of type of data you will collect. If it's sensitive or special categories, you will also need this kind of assessment. Okay. So, yeah. What does it mean? Yeah. So how long? What is a long time frame? What is a lot of people, and what is a lot of variables? Right. What is a lot? So, in my country, we think about a lot of people will be hundreds or thousands or 10,000s or the whole population. Okay, that will be a lot of people, right? And a long time period will be more than 5 years, maybe more than 10 years, it depends. And if you have a lot of variables, like in Norway, we can use administrative data. It will be possible for you to collect like 400 variables on one person. Then we will often require that we do this kind of assessment. So, and of course in Norway we can connect all the variables to identity of the person. So that's why. In other countries you will not be able to do that, to connect the identity to the data. So this is but the practice will be different from countries, between countries. And of course this will be new to a lot of countries. But in Norway we have had this system before. We had a system that resembled this. So we have some experience on how to define what is a lot of people, what is a lot of variables, what is, so we have some experience from earlier then. Okay, yeah. So, and of course, I will talk more about this assessment when it comes to collaboration after the break. So we will talk more about how to do this. We have some experiences on this already when Norwegian researchers are collaborating with other researchers and they need this kind of assessment and how they do it. So I will just tell you some, this is the last thing. The sharing of data. I just want to remind you that if you are planning on sharing or archiving data, you need to have that in mind when you start your project, right? So you need to think about gaining consent or give information to participants if you're planning on sharing or archiving data. And you need to tell them exactly what kind of data you are going to share and how identifiable the data will be. And this is a very big subject. I will just touch upon it because it's important for us as a data archive to remind you on this all the time. Okay. So of course, if you want to discuss sharing and archiving, you can also ask me questions and we can also talk about it after the break. Okay, yeah, thank you. She said that in Croatia they have this National Data Protection Authority website. There you will find a list. And for most countries, the data protection authorities will have this list. And I think it would be interesting maybe for us to check if there are differences between countries. So because our authority has also this list and we are just like tearing our hair out because it's too long and it's too much for us to handle because we do not necessarily agree with it, right, Marianne? The list, no, we don't really, but of course they are the authority, we are not, so we have to, yeah, it's very long and it includes a lot. So sometimes you need to adjust and you need to give them feedback on the list. We have done it. We gave them feedback and said, okay, some of it is not possible to handle for research. But I'm not. Have you looked into it?
Yes.
Is it okay? So it depends. If you're a researcher, you will think this is impossible to handle. Then you ask your institution, can you help me to, handle this? And we will do that for our users, and probably you will have some people helping you with this locally. So, and of course feedback is important also to the authorities about these lists and how to interpret the GDPR. So do that. Give them feedback. We are only 1 year into the GDPR. So we can always give them feedback and we can adjust the lists and whatever they will say. Okay, I think we will have the short break now.